Hello, everyone. Hi. I'm Cynthia Robinson, Chair of the Department of Black Studies, and I would like to welcome you to UNO. I know some of you might think I'm going to moderate this event, but I'm not. I am really only up here to say hello, everyone. Hi. And to introduce myself as a person connected to this university. But the person who's really putting this on is Terry Crawford. And Terry Crawford is going to welcome you and say, hey, everyone. I think we're waiting on a couple more people.
We are, but we're going to go ahead and get started.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. You guys, anybody in here, UNO alum? Okay, most of the room. Good. No, I'm kidding. Like 4 people raised their hand. Yeah. So you guys, this really is a welcome to UNO, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome to UNO and to this event. We have over here on the table. Over here, there are a lot of things over here on the table for you guys to get, and then there are some note cards for you to ask questions, and also a survey for you to fill out afterwards. All right. So I am going to pass this on to my colleague, Terry Crawford.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. Okay, everybody, I just want to say good evening and thank you so much for coming to our Racial Justice Candidates Forum. We are so glad to have this opportunity to have this conversation with the elephant that's in the room that we never talk about. It is constantly present, but no one really talks about it. So we're really glad to have this opportunity to talk about it. I first want to give a shout out to the sponsors. Department of Black Studies, of course, with Dr. Robinson, and also Professor Peggy Jones is here as well from the Department of Black Studies. Give a wave, hey. Department of Black Studies, and on cue, my sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, is also one of the sponsors for the event tonight. We also have Black Votes Matter. I don't see Preston Love, but he will be here tonight. Who else do we have? We have Noise, who is also one of our sponsors. League of Women Voters, of which I am a member. And then we have, who am I missing, Anthony? Who am I missing as our sponsors? Black Men United is our 6th sponsor. So we want to thank all of our sponsors for helping put this event together, and we're going to go ahead and talk about why we're here. In 12 days, millions of people across the country will go to the ballot box and cast their vote for individuals who maybe think like them and maybe not. For individuals who have had conversations, who have had debates, who may or may not have addressed the issue of racial justice, at least directly, but all of us will go and cast a vote. So we want to have the opportunity tonight for those of us who live in this community to have that conversation with individuals who are asking you for your vote. You will have an opportunity tonight to decide whether or not they deserve your vote. Not just based on these answers tonight, but based on everything that has happened over this political season. So pay close attention, and as Dr. Robinson said, we do have index cards so that you can write down your own questions. There are some questions that will be posed to the candidates by the moderators, but this is not about the moderator, this is about you. So we are hoping that you have plenty of questions to ask these individuals regarding racial justice, particularly in our community. I do have a script because I have a tendency to go off script and I will go on a tangent, and you had to pull me back in. So I'm going to really try to stay on script. So in order for us to make informed decisions, it's important for us to have this conversation. Again, there is this racialized elephant in the room. You guys have been in conversations where no one ever said the word race, but you know it was forever present in that conversation. It happened with Trayvon Martin when they had the trial. And prior to, there I go on a tangent. Okay, I'm sorry, I'll bring it back in because this is not about me and I don't want to take all the time because I want you to listen to the candidates. Okay, so we're going to have an opportunity to talk about that racialized elephant in the room and also talk about what has come to be known as reasonable racism. Now, I'm going to do a plug right now for a book that everyone should read if you have not. It is called Negrophobia and Reasonable Racism, The Hidden Cost of Being Black in America. This should become really required reading for anyone on any level, be that college level, high school. That's not going to happen. But yes, reasonable racism is one of the things that he talks about in his book as to why it has become so widespread for some of the things that happen. We'll talk about this tonight. Policing in our communities, economic disparities that exist in our communities, and also many other disparities that we're going to talk about. So let's talk about housekeeping right now. So hopefully all of you have a copy of the program and how that's going to play out tonight. First, we are going to have remarks by Jessica Hernandez, who is running for Douglas County Clerk of the District Court. After that, we hope to have Ms. Eastman and also Mr. Bacon. Maybe he'll be here, maybe he won't. Mina Davis and Megan Hunt will be up after that. Spencer Danner, Mike Hughes, and Mr. Dunning or his representative, and then Eric Williams and Tom Barrett will be up. So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Eastman's daughter had surgery today, so I think that she called and said she couldn't come, but.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. I'm not sure who she called, but that's good to know. Okay, thank you for that information. But we're not going to let that stop the program. We'll just move on to whatever the next, I won't call it the race, but the next political candidate, group of political candidates. Thank you for that information because I did not have it, that she would not be here tonight. In fact, well, okay, I'm going on a tangent again and I won't do that. Housekeeping. So we're going to go ahead and move on to Jessica Hernandez because we only have this room until 8:30 and I want to... Jennifer Hernandez. Forgive me. We're going to move on to Jennifer Hernandez. I want to make sure that we are respecting everyone's time. We have to be out of this room by 8:30 this evening. So we're going to go ahead and allow Jennifer to come up and talk to us. Thank you so much. Jessica, I will not call you Jennifer again. Jessica, forgive me. Well, it says Jessica on here.
That is not.
Okay, then okay. I know I can read. Okay, I am sorry. Thank you so much. The floor is yours.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit about why I'm running and what it has to do with racial justice. So my name is Jennifer Hernandez and I'm running for Clerk of the District Court for Douglas County. And a lot of the issues that we see with racial justice as far as people being unfairly treated in the courts, people being jailed at a higher rate if they're black or brown, a lot of that are things that the clerk can't fix, but there are some things that I think that we can fix if we have the right person in that office. So what I'd like to do is do community outreach and education for people who have no experience with the courts and they don't get experience until they've been through the system, and so they're entering at a disadvantage, and then they don't learn how to defend themselves because most of them can't afford an attorney. I'm a domestic violence advocate, so I work with a lot of people who are, LGBTQIA, people of color, low-income families, and a lot of things that I've learned from working with them is that they have no legal experience, they don't know how the process works, and they don't learn it until they go through it, and at that time it's often too late, and so they're getting jailed at a higher rate, and that's something that we can fix just by education and outreach to our communities. So some of the things that I'd like to do to fix that are to rewrite self-help forms for clarity to make them available in multiple languages, because especially for immigrants and people who have no legal background, if you are representing yourself, you probably don't speak legalese, so you don't know what these forms mean, and so self-help instructions aren't going to help you anyway, even if you get them. So I'd like to rewrite them to make them easier for people who have no legal background and make them available in multiple languages. I also want to have more online services so that people who are shift workers and who can't afford to take the time off of work are able to get some court services done without having to take that time off of work. We do have some e-services, but a lot of it benefits attorneys, so they can work until, midnight and still submit forms. We need to do that sort of thing for people who can't afford to take time off of work to get there during court hours during the day. So these are just some of the goals that I have, and I'd love to talk to you after if you have any questions. Now I'm happy to answer them. Again, my name is Jennifer Hernandez. I'm running for clerk of the district court for Douglas County.
What do you think people of color have to teach you as you enter into this? If you get there, what do you need to learn from people of color in your position?
So I think that everybody in the clerk's office could stand to learn from the unique issues that people face. So I grew up poor, so I know some of the struggles that people deal with when they're entering the system, because my youngest brother had some issues with the courts when he was younger. And so the struggles that people who can afford an attorney and people who can't are often separated by color. There's a lot of people who can't afford an attorney, and often those are people of color. So my youngest brother, I'm Korean, I don't look it, but my two younger brothers do. And so they've gotten a lot of the racism and a lot of the stuff when they're entering the court system that I haven't gotten. So I've seen some of that, and I'm always open to learning, and I can't answer exactly what I could learn because I'm still always learning, but I'm always open to having a conversation with somebody and learning what their experiences are and how the courts could be easier for them to access. Yes?
When you say college, what does that mean?
So to me, that means that we're talking with people who have questions and just being more transparent. So we could do forums where people ask questions on how a process works. So the clerk's office cannot give legal advice, so we couldn't do anything like that. But what we could do is answer questions about, how a process works so that people can learn before they ever need to use the courts for anything. And then what we can do is also put them in touch with people that offer services that they need. So as a domestic violence advocate, a lot of what I do is I'm helping a person and their family get in touch with grants for people who are escaping abusive situations, or putting them in touch with attorneys that have experience in their area, or helping them find shelters, or helping them find public assistance. And I think a lot of that experience could translate to this office, because if you needed an attorney but you didn't know who would be good, who has experience with your situation, you might just call an attorney that you know or that a friend of a friend knows, and they might not specialize in what you need. Or you could just start filling out forms and really screw yourself up, because I've helped people who just fill out forms and they put in what they think the answers are, and then they have to go back and start the whole process over again once they go in front of the judge, because nobody at the clerk office is going to look at your forms and tell you that things are wrong, because they don't know that they're wrong all the time. So it's things like education on how the process works, education on what services are available, and also listening and speaking with people on what services they need that we aren't currently providing, or that we could be providing in a better way. Does anybody else have any questions? All right, thank you.
Next, we're going to have Erin Feichtinger come and talk to us.
She was practicing my last name and got it on the first try, which almost never happens in my life. So I appreciate that. Yeah, one day, Spencer, one day. I'm going to keep this short as much as possible, mainly because I've been knocking doors every day for 10 months, and 12 days out, I think I'm finally getting sick, and I'm having trouble controlling my body temperature, and I think there's a lot of people in this room who feel the same way, right? No? Nobody does? Okay, thank you. Well, my name is Erin Feichtinger, and I'm running for the Metro Community College Board of Governors in District 2, which is basically all of Northeast Omaha. And I'm running because I believe that education is the best tool that we have to empower every single member of our community. If education wasn't directly connected to empowerment, then there wouldn't be so many people trying to make it so difficult to get an education. And I know that in the grand scheme of this election, maybe you aren't spending a lot of time thinking about the Metro Community College race, but you should. Because Metro stands for equality for each of us. Because it is both of and for the community. Metro stands for equality because it doesn't care where you grew up, or how much your parents make, or how much they don't make. Metro doesn't care if you're a dreamer. Metro doesn't care if you went to prison. Metro doesn't care if you are young, or you are old, or you have special needs, or if you have any of the other markers, physical, hidden, or otherwise, that are often used to separate, marginalize, and oppress us. And if we want that type of education, if we want to ensure that we live in a more equal, a more just society, then we have to make sure that there are people on the Metro Board of Governors who will support inclusion and equity and who believe that every single one of us deserves opportunity. Because here's the basic fact. If we aren't paying attention, then we're losing. If we aren't guarding every avenue to equality, then we will lose that access. So I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank you for fitting me in and for saying my name right. Again, never happens. My random joke is that it's pronounced Smith, just for everyone's ease. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to be engaged. I'm not going to lie to you, I decided to run because I was incredibly angry. I'm still angry, but I'm also optimistic. And I'm optimistic because of discussions like these in rooms full of people like you. And if we want justice and equity at every level of our society, then we need to demand justice and equity from every candidate up and down the ballot. I believe in what Metro stands for because I believe in the power of education, and I promise you that I will fight for it every day. So I'll see you at your doors, I'll see you at the ballot box, and after November 6th, I will see you on the Metro Board of Governors. And like the beautiful Jennifer Hernandez, I will also answer questions to the best of my ability, if necessary. Tom.
What does the Board of Governors do in relationship to the administration of the school?
Yeah, so the Board of Governors, in the most simple and I would say limited way possible, right, like helps the administration make decisions. They approve the budget, they help influence the budget, and that's the most simple, basic explanation, right? But I think we would all agree in this room that a budget is a moral document, right? Your household budget says what you prioritize. What we're spending at the state level says what we prioritize. So for me, being able to influence, being able to prioritize certain things in the budget, like student support services, services for students with special needs, making Metro a place where students know where to go in the community if they are hungry, if they are homeless, if they are dealing with literally any other problem that often goes unnoticed in our society, right? So for me, you know, it's an unpaid once-a-month position at its most basic level, right? But to me, it's also incredibly important because of the fact that a budget is a moral document, and because of the fact that justice and equity have to exist in education, or else we are doomed as a society. Not to put too fine a point on it. Eric.
Do you think that you mentioned unpaid, like no compensation at all?
Well, we have a travel budget to go to fund community college conferences, and as a former academic, I'm thrilled about that opportunity.
Do you think across the board in other elected positions that the compensation or other barriers prevent certain groups of people from having access to leadership roles?
Absolutely they do. So fun fact about me, I'm a little like you. If I don't have a script, I'm way off tangent. I'm a former history professor. So we can get real deep in the weeds here, Eric, if you'd like. Yeah, historically, offices have been reserved for white landowning males who had the time and the budget to be able to leave their farms, and because it was in the hands of their slaves or their servants, and go do the good public work that was required of them, right? So that's historically. We need to change that. And the reason that we have compensation for elected officials is precisely because of that barrier that you've mentioned. I will say, you know, I like to tell people when people ask, well, what are you getting out of this? I'm like, it's the longest job interview I've ever had for an unpaid job. Yeah, and I have to talk to way more than just 3 people on a hiring board, right? Like, it's thousands of people who often think I'm running for Metro Utilities District. I have opinions about that too. So I think that absolutely the unpaid positions, or the fact that our legislature makes $12,000 a year, which means it's only for newlyweds and nearly deads, right, who have the time and the resources to do it, is absolutely a barrier to increased participation, equity, and inclusion at every level of our government.
That's why I love you, Erin.
Like, I got into Greek history at the Black Men United Forum. What else you got?
I'm going to use the microphone so the fine folks watching noise can hear this. But one of the things that's been a movement in mostly cities across the United States, but also is starting to happen at the state level, is funding for community college to make it free for everyone who graduates from high school in that community. So would you tell us your position on that, and then also if you have any influence over that in the role once you get elected?
Yeah, good question.
That's an excellent question. Let me specifically answer, I absolutely support free community college for everybody. Yeah, and I would even take it further. I have no say over what happens at the federal level in the Metro Community College Board of Governors race. But I will say, I work in food insecurity and homelessness right now in the community. And I would say that I've heard some really good proposals of expanding the National School Lunch Program to include the first 2 years of college as well, so that students don't have to deal with that. I think that's a terrific idea, right? Why wouldn't we do that? Why would we not reduce every barrier to access to education that we possibly can? In my role, I'm just assuming that I'm going to be there in January. You know, so, okay.
You should.
Well, I appreciate that, everyone. This is great. This is great. Miss Bertha, 93 years old at the doors, told me that the other day, so I appreciate that. In regards to what I can do, I'm not sure that I could show up on the first meeting and say, you know what I think we should do is I think we should have free community college, right? At the same time that our governor is trying to cut funding for public education, free, equitable public education at every level, right? But at the same time, I think it's necessary to have someone with vision on the board, right? Someone who's not just okay with the status quo, who says it's fine the way it is, right? We need someone who can look way ahead into the future and see the forest for the trees, right? And that's what I think I would bring to that discussion. But yes, I absolutely support free community college.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, so we could have Megan and Mina make your way to the table. And as you are doing that, I will get my questions ready. So we're going to give each one of you an opportunity to give kind of like a 2-minute intro of who you are and what your platform is, and then we'll get into our questions. Don't forget the index cards on the table if you want to pose any questions. And I think our group is small enough that we can come up to the mic and use the mic.
All right, shall I start with an intro?
Sure.
Okay, cool. My name is Megan Hunt, and I'm running for the state legislature in District 8, which includes the neighborhoods of Dundee, Benson, around Memorial Park, and then up into the Keystone area, so a big part of Midtown Omaha there. I've lived in this district, and I've been a business owner in this district for about 14 years, and I'm running because I really want to help Nebraska do more for small business owners and workers to help create better outcomes for public school kids and to increase access to affordable health care. And these are issues that I've spent over a decade working on with groups in the legislature, in the school board, in the city council, and
I really believe that we need more people in the legislature, to kind of echo something that Erin said earlier, who have a big vision, who have a big dream, who don't say, we're not gonna be able to get these big things done because they haven't been done. But to have somebody who has a vision and also has the work ethic and the connections in the community to make that happen. I look forward to serving the people that I represent. I'm not running to tell anybody what's best for them. I'm running to have communication and have a conversation with the people I represent to make sure that their interests are finally taken seriously by the folks who represent them. Because I think that's what's been missing in our legislature since it began. So thank you, Megan Hunt.
Let me adjust this. All right, perfect. So my name is Mina Davis, and it's a pleasure to be here today. I want to thank everybody who showed up, because the first rule of politics is if you really want to make a difference and make an impact, you need to be present, you need to show up, and it needs to be in a way that's truly meaningful, building relationships. The reason why I chose to run for office began 2 years ago, especially as, people constantly said, you don't have enough money, we are being outspent, and I don't care about that. Because as a working person, I already know what odds have been against me since the day I was born. As a Black and Asian woman, I already know a lot about that too. I felt that we needed to save our country, our state, my community from people who weren't necessarily not only just responding to our needs, but weren't really paying attention to what was happening on the ground. I'm an organizer, not a politician. I'm the person that you never see. I'm build and bring relationships to the table, and I've been doing this work since I could drive, which was, 18, because I have an older sister, really limits your area that you can drive in. And so that to me meant, my big work began with John Ewing, and I really learned a lot of what got me out of the primary was what I learned from Obama's campaign in 2012 as a field organizer. So when you talk about big organizing, when you talk about lifting up those whose stories are oftentimes buried in a lot of just other events taking place, for me, what really makes a difference and what really matters is just being able to bring people back and say, this is your America, this is what I believe in. As somebody who is currently underemployed, I love Target, don't get me wrong, but I can tell you the America that I'm a part of isn't being spoken to. I think I have the unique opportunity in my race to say that, one of the things that I really look forward to doing is bringing not only a woman of color, which we have none, it's 2018 in the legislature, but also a working person perspective in which, there are a lot of people out there right now that don't feel that they are connected to their government officials, because it's one thing to talk at, it's another thing to speak with. I'm very, very happy to have met and engaged my community in ways that have not been done in a long time, in an authentic and genuine manner. So it's Mina Davis, and I'm ready to have a conversation tonight.
So for the first question, we're going to do a coin toss. Okay?
Ooh, I do this all the time.
So here we go. Call it.
Heads. Hey.
I'll take tails, that's great. Seems like a 50-50 chance.
Tails it is. Okay? So here's our first question. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, while African Americans make up 5% of Nebraska's population, they make up 25% of Nebraska's incarcerated population. What do you attribute to this, and what can be done in the unicameral to address this issue?
Thank you for that question.
You're very welcome.
Thank you again for organizing this. So, the problems that we have in our incarceration system are systemic because they're racist. From law enforcement, I lost an important endorsement actually for coming out on this issue, talking about the systemic racism in our law enforcement system and in our prison systems. And it's important to me that people know that, as a white woman who has not been system involved, I've never been connected to our carceral system. I'm not inclined to come into that community and tell formerly incarcerated people or their families or the communities that they're taken away from wrongly and unfairly and unjustly what's best for them. So what I've been doing is having conversations with formerly incarcerated people like Dominique Morgan, who are involved in an organization called Black and Pink, which works to support incarcerated people in the LGBT community, which I'm a part of myself. And so it's important to me that I'm not telling this population what's best for them, but that I'm learning from them. What I think that we need to do in Nebraska is that as marijuana legalization continues to move forward and cannabis becomes legalized in more states, hopefully that happens in Nebraska, and I look forward to taking the lead on that issue. We have to make sure that that law is being applied equitably, because I think there have been a lot of disastrous effects over the past generations of the war on drugs, and that those have obviously disproportionately affected the Black community. And I want to make sure that as we legalize it, we are not letting white people get rich in an industry that Black people have been incarcerated for. So making sure that people who are incarcerated for drug crimes have the opportunity to clear or modify their records going forward, and be the entrepreneurs that they should be in this economy. I'm also very passionate about voting rights and voter suppression. There's a law, the law right now is that formerly incarcerated people have to be 2 years off paper before they can vote again. I will bring a law right away in the legislature to make sure that as soon as people are off paper, they can vote right away. But I also don't think that goes far enough. I support enfranchisement for incarcerated people who are in our prisons and jails, because I think the government would be better if our elected officials had to care about incarcerated people as a voting bloc. And there are 2 other states in our country where incarcerated people are allowed to vote, and I think that that's the right thing to do, and that's what I'm going to be working toward as a legislator. Thank you.
All right, so for me, I look at this answer twofold. The first is addressing the systemic issues. So frankly, we have to think about where this begins. As somebody who has been in the community and actually lives around a lot of where criminal activity takes place, and have had neighbors who we've had honest conversations about, okay, like what am I gonna do because I can't afford to pay this traffic ticket, and this is something that can literally land me in jail. You know, if you think about this, as somebody who has spent time in North Omaha and really elsewhere as a brown child growing up in Millard and literally fearing for my life every day, you want to talk about incarceration, you have to talk about where it really starts is from the day that, people who are not white when we're born. We need to talk about the school to prison pipeline. We need to really address the fact that there are kids who are getting suspended at higher rates, really, really young. What does that do to perpetuate that same kind of system in the way that they're being taken out of their classrooms, placed in in-school suspension, and not necessarily being addressed in an equitable manner? We also need to talk about the fact that when crime occurs and when it happens, it goes beyond, the issue of legalization. But let's talk about the fact that people I know oftentimes can't even get to their jobs. The bus line, for one thing, not only isn't necessarily running on time all the time, it's the fact that the city chooses not to invest. It's a car culture, and that creates problems. When you have people who choose to pull out in terms with regards to economic development, that also lends to that issue. So we're looking at a whole entire system that is set up for those people to fail, and I think that's something that we need to recognize. Second is we need to look at where we are as a state. We know that LB 605, so this is a particular bill that talks about where our prison system is. We know that we're facing overcrowding, and frankly, we know the majority of the population. Yes, I too am concerned about voting rights. I too am concerned about where we're going to go in the future. But frankly, this is a discussion that it's gotten to the point where the ACLU has had to sue our Department of Corrections. So as somebody who is going to be in that position to make a difference, I want to address it in 2 different ways. Not only what's currently going on, but let's look at the systemic issues. Let's look at the foundation, because you can say everything in the world you want, but at the end of the day, if you're not getting to the core, if you're not addressing the root causes, the system, everything else is not going to matter, and it's not going to get better. And that's kind of where, somebody who's in the thick of it, who sees and talks to people every single day about this, it's something that I think we need to have this at the forefront of our mind, and also keep up the fact that, I'm proud to say that Nebraska has no private prisons here, and I really want to continue to make sure that there's no opportunity for that ever in the future.
I love getting old. It's so wonderful. My question is, what are some early childhood educational policies you would, this is both candidates obviously, yeah, you would seek to enact if elected? So early childhood educational policies.
Yeah, I guess I'll jump in on this. So I want to say, I think my former principal, I never can call him senator. He is always Dr. Klosky to me. Obviously and clearly, this wasn't ever going to make it out of the education committee, given who the chair is. And a lot of that, it was making, or rather addressing something with regards to universal pre-K. So essentially, that he was recognizing and making a piece of legislation that would allow for it to be in the Constitution, the state Constitution, and say, this is a right. So education is a right. Clearly, that did not get out or go anywhere. But for me, it would really mean working with the resources that we have in state. So, we do have centers here at UNO, along with UNL, that really work towards supporting these early childhood education programs. I also too know I want to make sure Title 20 daycares, these are things that are oftentimes for working parents 24 hours a day. I know people in the community that these are crucial for. Let's make sure that the funding stays. Because when you're a working parent, a single parent household, or both parents are working, it gets very difficult because childcare is expensive. My parents remind me of this every day. I come from a family of 5. And so, it becomes to the point where I want to make sure that we are enforcing and encouraging and supporting a culture in which we not only celebrate early childhood education, but we make sure the funding is there not only from the start, but making sure that we take care of working people in ways that address equity at all levels.
Okay, we have another audience question. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
What I have heard from speaking to leaders in the Black community is that early childhood education is one of the most important places that we can invest to close that opportunity gap that so many kids face in our city, and I think it's really too bad. If we want every child to have the opportunity for success, then we need to make sure that every child has the opportunity to learn. And I think that we can close that opportunity gap by guaranteeing every child's right to a quality education that meets them where they are, that has effective teachers, that has safe classrooms, which is not currently the standard, and also that we take away any possibility of suspension or expulsion in early childhood education, because that's also not a policy in schools that's applied fairly across race, and so we know there's discrimination at play there. The top nations in the world and the top states in our country are investing in early childhood education, and so to see our governor showing clearly through his statements, through his budget, through his vetoes, that that's not something that he prioritizes, well, to me that says a lot about where he comes from, and that says a lot about the problems that he is completely blind to in our state, across our entire state. This affects rural populations quite a bit as well. And I think that we need legislators who are going to be a check on the executive branch, who are going to stand toe-to-toe with that man and tell him that we're not going to take these resources away from the people that need them most. I also believe we need to support workforces, the single parents like myself, who are depending on early childhood education to support their kids and help raise them upright. It does take a village, and I know that firsthand. So we need to be investing in things like paid family leave. We need to make sure that workers are getting a fair wage, because the cost of childhood childcare and early childhood education, I don't think that it should be more than a certain percentage of your income. So that's legislation that I would be interested in looking at, is capping the amount of money that you spend on early childhood education and childcare, so that you can receive a higher subsidy if you make less money. I think that would be a great first step to finding some solutions that will create more equitable opportunities for people regardless of their zip code, regardless of their background, regardless of how much money their parents make. Because when I talk about building a strong public education system in Nebraska, that's where we need to begin investing. Thank you.
Good evening. So now I'm about to wear 2 different hats. So first, I just want to tell you both ladies that you guys have ran an awesome campaign. And this has been the hardest thing for me, working as a Democrat with both of you guys and having to remain nonpartisan. But I just want to tell you, both you ladies, like, great job. And
We're both Democrats, if it's not like kind of clear.
yeah, so I have to be nonpartisan when I come to work for both of them, but I can tell you guys, you've done an awesome job. So, as of November 7th, well, 6th that evening, we will know who will be representing this LD, this legislative district. Now, we know that Senator Justin Wayne has introduced LD 75. This will be the 3rd year for the 2-year ban. It's gonna come back. Can you assure us that the next day, myself or Jake Seaman, who are his team in Lincoln, will be getting a call from you to be in support of LB 75 or whatever the bill number will be to introduce, so that we can get our felons or our people who are, once they're on papers, to be able to vote instantly instead of having to wait 2 years?
I just wrote down, call Justin November 7th, and so that's going in my calendar, and that means I'm gonna do it. If it's in my calendar, I'm doing it. If it's not, I can't promise, but it's going in there. So. Yes, Precious, thank you.
Definitely, most definitely. I think, it's just living my legacy, especially as I think about where I come from as a Black woman. That, the fact that 2 generations ago, my grandma could not vote. 3 generations back, they hung people for voting, and obviously now this is just a new way of suppressing people and their votes. So, fact is, I'm ready to work November 7th. Yes, I have it in my calendar. I've got multiple calendars. Holiday season's coming up, as you know. I work at Target, so let me tell you, it's gonna be a rip-roaring ride as we get to Black Friday. So, but you know what? This is important.
I'll say November 8th, because I won't be in November 7th.
Okay. Y'all got me all the time.
I'll give you up to that Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're both there too on that one, yeah.
We're going to do one more question from the audience.
Good evening to both of you, and I appreciate being here because I did have a few questions. In the spirit of full disclosure, I work with a lot of ethnic minorities and economically disenfranchised youth across the city. And several issues have come to mind for me personally, and one we touched on briefly about early childhood education. And as an educator, I understand the importance of reaching that demographic from birth to 1st grade, more so than ever. If you can change that outcome, we know that it can change that prison pipeline. And I am wondering, what are your thoughts on creating universal standards for early childhood providers?
So I guess my thing is this is, as somebody who has had colleagues working in education, and like I've mentioned, my former principal, Dr. Klosky, and his staff have been very, very knowledgeable on this issue. I definitely support this. Clearly that there was legislation that he introduced that touched upon this idea. Hopefully we can see changes in the education committee, because really that's what was preventing a lot of the discussion in terms of that. So I think what we need to do next is to really have more allies that would allow this to actually pass, because the thing that happens is we can bring forth a bill, and this is something I'm very passionate about, because I know my parents made the choices they did and the sacrifices they did and moved me to the neighborhood they did because of the very reason you mentioned. And so for me, I feel I'm hoping and supporting my friends all across the state so that when it comes time, we will reintroduce that. And then we can have those discussions, and it will make it out of committee, and that we will be able to say, hey, let's amend this, let's amend that. But to me, what broke my heart the most was the fact that it was a deadlock bill, it would not get out, and we were kind of at a loss for this legislative session. So it's something that I am very, very passionate about, and looking forward to making sure that it happens.
Yes, I want the Nebraska educational system to prioritize early childhood education. I want universal free preschool and kindergarten for all of the kids in Nebraska. And in childcare, in daycares and places that aren't schools, legally or whatever, that so many parents, especially low-income parents, single parents, rely on before the school years begin. We don't have enough safety standards, we don't have enough accountability, and we don't have any recourse adequately for parents who, they know that their children aren't in the best environment that they would like to provide for them. But we know that those parents are doing their best, and the state is not doing their best until they're standing behind those other parents and saying, we've got your back. As a state legislator, I will have the parents' back when they say, something's going on in this daycare, we need to have inspections, we need to have safety standards, we need to have educational standards. And I think that this speaks to a larger issue that schools and communities need to address the whole child for children to thrive. We need to talk about behavioral health and not be cutting the budget for that. A senator on the floor in the last session said, schools should only be worried about reading, writing, and arithmetic, not talking about your feelings. And that just cut me to my core because, I'm sure there's many people in this room who can relate. I don't think I would be here today if not for the counseling services that I was able to access as a young adult and a teenager through my school. So that's often the first line of defense that we have in our communities to keep people from getting in trouble, to keep people out of the school to prison pipeline. And we also need to support teachers who are doing this very, very difficult work and very underappreciated work, I think, in our state. We'll go back again to the governor. When we have a governor and we have a lot of people in our legislative body in Nebraska who don't prioritize support for teachers, we're saying that we don't prioritize educating our future coworkers, adults, entrepreneurs, workers, our workforce in Nebraska. And we're facing a huge workforce shortage, a workforce crisis in our state. So if we're not investing in job training for those people, technical training, affordable education opportunities, I too support free community college, and I look forward to working with the Metro Board and Metro Community College to make that happen in Nebraska. You all know this is very systemic, and I could too talk about this for a long time, but to answer your question directly, yes, we need safety standards, we need quality standards. Those need to be enforceable, and providers need to be accountable to the parents that they serve.
Okay, we're going to do one more question from our list, and Mina, this comes to you first. The seat that both of you are seeking encompasses historic North Omaha. You have both stated that you are pro-economic growth and pro-development. Can you, in your own words, describe the difference between growth and gentrification? And what ideals do you have to ensure that gentrification does not increase in North Omaha?
All right, so it's one of my favorite because I see this as I look across at the CVS from 50th and Dodge. I'll start it off by saying it like this. When people come from a place of entitlement and just seizing opportunity in ways that say this is a great ripe area to just develop, one of the things that we have to really recognize is if they don't actually involve the people in that community and start pushing people out. You know how many times I've heard in the community of Dundee that, my God, my rent's raised to $100, $200, where am I gonna go? People are moving further east. And let me drop some facts on you. If you know, like the CPAC building releases these facts about our districts, and you can go and look it up. And one of the things I noticed and pointed out to people is the median housing value has dropped $50,000 in 4 years. So what that tells me is that we have people moving further east. And when I look at that development going across the way, like, don't get me wrong, it's fantastic that we're having this. We have some awesome opportunities of redevelopment. But you know what that also means? $2,000 a month? Who is gonna live in that? Young professionals, that's fantastic, but we also have people who have been there for decades who are consistently being pushed out. And that is gentrification, not economic development in the sense when we're talking about equity. So yes, when we think about historic North Omaha, which I have spent so much time, and actually I am very thankful for that area because that is what got me through at midnight on May 15th, so I will never turn my back on them. And I'd say this, you know, how one of the ideas I have is actually sitting down and having these hard conversations and saying, you know, I understand that you're really invested in NODA. Look, I went to Creighton, okay? 4 years, I've seen what's happened there, but I've also seen what's happened when they've locked communities out and have chosen to use developers that aren't necessarily from that area in order to create these venues that aren't able to be accessed by the very people who've been living there for decades. You know, for me, I have to say, why not actually have a conversation about what people in this area use? We have wonderful nonprofits in Omaha. Yeah, I'm thinking about, you know, what Julianne runs, Julie Smith. I guess I'm getting the Facebook names mixed. One Omaha. She does a wonderful workshop in terms of like thinking about what that community needs. We need to do that, because at the end of the day, when we're looking at all these like expensive restaurants, expensive this, expensive that, I'm going to tell you what's been happening in every single other city across this country. Austin, Texas, Chicago, San Francisco is one of the worst. You think about Des Moines, you think about Kansas City. What's happening there is that poor people, people of color, working people like me, hello, we are being pushed out because apparently, according to these developers, we don't have a right there to live there because we apparently don't spend the right kind of money, wear the right kind of clothes, and don't have the right kind of access. And that's what people in North Omaha have not been just dealing with this election cycle, but for decades. So let me tell you, call it what it is. It's people coming from a place of entitlement to steal our, what actually is part of our community and forget about us because apparently we're not economically viable. So hopefully, come November 7th, November 8th, I want to have a discussion and say, you care about where we live, you want to make this better for us, then actually have us at the table instead of having meetings excluding the very people in that neighborhood, because frankly, we're tired of it and we know what's going on.
Economic development that is put on the backs of the working class is not development. It's just making the rich richer, and it's just increasing the wealth gap and the wealth divide that we have in our communities here. Unless we're involving local businesses, local shop owners, people who have lived in those communities for decades in many cases, like Mina was saying, she's absolutely right. All we're doing is dividing our communities more, and that's not something I support. I am a business owner. I run a small boutique. We started online about 6 years ago, and we opened a brick and mortar in Dundee about 3 or 4 years ago. And we were initially in Benson, and then we moved downtown to the Nodo area, and now we're in Dundee, and I think we're there to stay. But with the experience that I've had over the past decade plus in our local startup community and our local entrepreneurial community, I have taken every opportunity that I've ever had to hold my fellow entrepreneurs in Omaha accountable for that, to tell them, you know, are we using local talent? Are we listening to local voices? If there's a vendor, you know, 4 blocks north of here that we could call on to do this catering instead of, you know, bringing someone else in who's maybe not treating their workers as well, or it's more of a corporate type of thing. I've always been there to stand up for those small businesses because I'm a small business owner myself. I hire local people, we use ethical wages and ethical business practices, and that is what small business owners do. You know, no matter what background you come from, no matter what race you are, I think that that's something that unites the entrepreneurial community in Omaha and the small business ownership community. So to me, gentrification is when we are cutting out those small business owners and we're cutting out the people who are already community leaders and bringing in new community leaders, usually white, usually wealthy, and saying these people know what's best for your neighborhood. We're gonna have expensive new restaurants, we're gonna have expensive new housing with no space for low-income housing. And we're gonna, like Mina was saying as well, really price you out of participating in the community that you've helped to build. I'm against that, and every opportunity I have, I will continue to fight against it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davis and Ms. Hunt. We're going to move now and transition to the next set of candidates. We want to thank both of you very much for what you're doing in the community, and we look forward to seeing either one of you in the seat after the 6th of November. Thank you for being here tonight.
How y'all doing? We're going to transition to the Secretary of State election between Spencer Danner and his opponent didn't show up, so we're just going to have a quick have a discussion. So Spencer Danner.
We don't even know.
Thank you so much for showing up, Spencer. Let's just get right to it. We see what's going on in Georgia. Potentially 300,000 people at risk of not being able to vote. Recently, a Supreme Court decision in North Dakota is disenfranchising Native American people, and the list goes on and on. Is this a function of racism, and how are you going to address it right here in Nebraska should you get elected?
All right. Well, thank you all. Again, as stated, my name is Spencer Danner. I'm your next candidate for Secretary of State. I will be your next Secretary of State. And, you know, what's been happening over the last couple of years is obviously shameful. What's happening in Georgia, as you articulated, when we're actually having individuals completely being suppressed because of the color of their skin, having individuals making sure that you suppress certain votes because they don't support your ideals, your values, or what you stand for. As Anthony's indicated, it's not only happening in Georgia, it's happening in Alabama, it's happening in Ohio, it's happening in North Dakota. It's happening in a place like North Dakota where suppressive ideas of just moving to a permanent address, a physical address, which now you cannot use a P.O. box, which affects our Native Americans. Which again, and I said this the other day, it kills me that you are actually trying to negatively affect the original inhabitants of this land, and it really continues to permeate throughout the entire country. In this state, we continuously see more efforts of trying to suppress votes. As your next Secretary of State, we have to make sure that we position ourselves in a way that actually elevates our message, elevates our people, elevates individuals all across the state, not just people of color, but our senior citizens, our rural communities, and everyone else that has been disenfranchised throughout this government. The gerrymandering that was talked about in the previous discussion, the redistricting that will continue to happen, that will again happen in 2020 when the United States Census actually comes out. This is what is going to continue to happen to our state. And as a Secretary of State, you must have somebody of high ethical value, high integrity, and actually understand the situation that we're about to incur. Individuals continually have their voices suppressed. And what is going to happen, and I'll give you a perfect example. In 2020, when the United States Census comes out, that's actually going to document who we are, what ethnicities we are, race, color, and actually where we are throughout the entire community. They're going to utilize that to actually redistrict our community. So imagine this, imagine taking that outside line that goes outside North Omaha towards Pumpkin Hills, and that everything north of us and west of us is actually Congressional District 3. Imagine redistricting and taking that imaginary line right down Swanson Parkway. Then everyone north of Swanson Parkway their votes would then go into Congressional District 3. That is a very plausible thing that our folks in Lincoln are trying to do. The two young ladies that were up here before, they are part of this solution. This is done by the legislature. What the Secretary of State does is actually monitor that and actually manage that process, directly and indirectly. But it's actually done by the legislature. And I, for instance, once I become Secretary of State, I will not only talk to whoever wins this district on November 7th, and I will have that phone call immediately after I win November 6th, is to ensure that we look for an independent redistricting committee that is completely separate from Lincoln and separate from our state. Not to say that our senators can't do the job, because I do think we need to have senators on that committee, but we also need to have community people on that committee. We need to have business owners on that community. We need to make sure that if you are going to redistrict, if you are going to talk about a community, you need to be inclusive of that community. That's what's important, so that the individuals in Lincoln are not just making decisions that are not inclusive of our thoughts, of our being, of our beliefs, and what we stand for. That's what the Secretary of State is going to do when it comes to ensuring that the redistricting is not happening in our state. As far as just suppressing, it is blatant now. It used to be undercover. It is in your face. They are telling you that they don't want you to vote. They are telling you specifically that they don't want your votes on November 6th. You have to make sure to exercise your vote. Do not let anyone take this away. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself, but people ask me, Why did I decide to run? I give them the same phrase every single time, because I firmly believe voting is a right. And we have too many people in the majority saying that voting is a privilege. It is not a privilege. And as long as we continue to be treated as if it's a privilege, we are going to continue to have our votes suppressed. And that's what's going to continue to happen. You're going to continue to have people tell you that you don't count, that your voice does not deserve to be heard, because it's not a right, it's a privilege. You're telling a black man who and his ancestors and families and grandparents did not have a right to vote, and you're going to tell me it's a privilege. You're going to actually look at a woman who did not always have the right to vote and tell her it's a privilege to vote. How ridiculous does that sound? We have to ensure and demand our right to be able to vote. Once we actually do that, not only on November 6th, but moving forward in every election moving forward, once we start to do that and understand that that is a right, we will then take away the power that the majority has on us to suppress us from that.
I'm just reading closing statements of course, so I didn't forget about you.
Hey, Anthony.
But do we have a question from the oh sorry yeah.
I'm really short, I'm sorry. So I actually learned from you recently, Spencer, that the Secretary of State sits on the pardon board as well, right?
Yes.
And that you would be the first African American to sit on the pardon board. Is
That would be correct.
Okay, great. That's excellent, and I wish you all the best on that. So what would be your standards then, right now, on the pardon board to address the inequities in both incarceration and in sort of returning, the lives of returning citizens that are overburdened already by sort of...
I feel like I paid you to ask that question. It's fantastic.
I wish you did, because again, I'm running for an paid position.
Okay, so I'm gonna do my best to not give you an answer that's going to get me in trouble, but be very specific. First and foremost, as a member of the three-persons pardons board, it's your governor, your attorney general, and your secretary of state. We have never had a person of color. And not only would I be the first person of color as Secretary of State, I will be the first person of color in any constitutional position in the state. That is governor, lieutenant governor, state treasurer, Secretary of State, Attorney General, and state auditor. So we need to make sure that we're aware of that. It's not just about Secretary of State. It covers 6-7 positions of having someone of color. Obviously, we know 88% of the individuals that are coming in front of the pardons board are people of color. That is extremely high. On top of that, there is, of that 88%, keep in mind, 62% of those get denied. Okay? Extremely, extremely high number. That is important. The other 10% or so of the majority that actually goes in front of them, over 70% get approved. Okay? So there is a very large gap there that we need to be addressing. Okay?
So you're saying the 10% that do get approved, those are not people of color?
That is correct. So we have to make sure there's a lot of things that we have to be able to do. Now keep in mind, one thing that we have to look at as a pardons board, first of all, is that they don't meet a lot at all. We have people that have been waiting to get in front of the pardons board for over a decade. Imagine these individuals, this isn't just about getting your sentences commuted. In fact, the vast majority of the people that go in front of the pardons board are just asking to have their rights restored. They're asking to be able to vote. They're asking to have things expunged off their record that when they were 19 or 20 years old now affects them as a 30 or 35-year-old because now they can't get a job, they can't get housing, but they can't get in front of the pardons board. So the first thing I will do is make sure that I'm working with the governor and the attorney general to make sure that we have to open your schedule up a little bit better. And we have to get more meetings in front of people so that individuals can actually have their voices heard. That is number one. That's the first thing I will do. Number two is that as far as how I would actually listen, this is what's important. We have to make sure we are listening to every single case that comes up and not have a pre-bias of the individuals that coming in or the actual crime that they committed. That happens quite a bit. You'll hear from our people that are part of the law enforcement that and because my wife is a prosecutor, I hear this all the time where we have overzealous judges and overzealous prosecutors, and we have really bad sentencing standards that are if you have an ounce of weed, you can go 1 to 50 years. And that's from a judge. can decide. You know, we have to be looking at all these. That's what's happening with these individuals that are going to prison. And when they're coming out, they're looking to hear somebody just actually listen. If you guys would actually see my Facebook thread and see how many people think that, first of all, that people are coming out of prison shouldn't be voting, and that they are now scum of the earth because they've made decisions in their life, every single one of those individuals deserve to have their voices heard.
Yeah.
Every single one of them. And if we, the leaders of this state, the powers that be that actually is going to reinstate those rights, if we're not actually hearing them and allowing them to be able to have their voices heard, then damn us, we're the problem then. It's not them. We have to be able to understand that I believe in restorative justice. And that might not be the same for our governor and attorney general. I can tell you, I believe in restorative justice. And what that simply means is that individuals, not only the individual that committed the crime actually has justice for that individual, but the entity or the individual they affected also feels they have justice restored as well. I believe in that. You have to make sure that you understand the entire case. Give me the paperwork. I'm going to know everything there is about that case, but when that individual comes in, because that individual deserves to have their complete voices heard. And you have to understand, when you come in from the pardons board, it's not just that individual. It's the person they come in that they committed the crime against, or the entity that's going to be there as well. Yeah. They want to make sure that their voices are heard too. So I know it's a very loaded question. I appreciate the question, but I can tell you that it's much bigger than what the pardons board is able to do. But I can tell you that it is important that these individuals listen and they provide that opportunity and they make a decision that is based on that case, not the drug case that came before you and you have something identical. You have to make it on that particular case, and that's what's important.
So I'm going to ask you one more question and give you your time to do your spiel, just because. We'll see. Actually, I do have two more. Yeah, oh, we do have an audience question. Okay. Oh, my bad, Sarah.
We got a couple of them.
You got two of them.
Currently, the pardons board has a 3-year wait period for individuals to even be qualified to get a pardon. How will we work to remove that?
Well, I think we have to make sure that we understand what that rule actually means and who actually is responsible for that rule. As indicated earlier, I'm a firm believer that as soon as you are off paper, that you should have certain rights restored, including voting and things like that. But there's also opportunity that once you are out of prison, the reason why they put a 3-year wait is because of the amount of time that they actually meet. So what we have to do is we have to encourage the individuals that actually set the meetings and individuals that are going to be a part of that meeting to actually meet more. I think if we actually have to do that first before we can actually create the 3-year backlog of individuals, I obviously want to make sure there is no 3-year wait. That is something for me. But I'm going to be honest with you. It's hard to actually tell them there's no longer a 3-year wait because you're still going to be waiting at least 3 years the way it is today. We have to make sure that we get more opportunities on the book. We have to have more meetings. We only meet 3 or 4 times a year. Okay, there are hundreds of people that come in each time. Okay, so yes, we need to be able to reduce that 3-year wait, but more importantly, first, we need to make sure that we're meeting more often so that more people can get in front of us, so we do have an opportunity to reduce that time period. There's one more. Yeah, there's one more. And that's a great button you have on right there.
As the Secretary of State, you are the head of the Real Estate Commission in the state of Nebraska, and you also would have your signatures on most professional licenses. What is your feeling about felons having professional licenses in the state of Nebraska?
And real quick, yeah, that's a good question. And I'm just going to add, because this was going to be my question too, because we've been talking about voting. Brother Joel brings up a good point. Can you talk about, the other aspects of the office that you're seeking and how that can also address systemic racism and injustice? Because it's not just about voting and the parole board. So I think that he piggybacks on other aspects of your office and how it can also address this issue.
So when I was with the city of Omaha, I ran the Small Emerging Business Program. We're the only program that actually allowed felons and individuals who had a record to actually be certified by the city. You could not by the state at the time. So am somebody that 100% is in favor of individuals that are coming out of prison, whether they are just out of prison or if they have a felony on the record, regardless of being able to have professional licenses in this state. We have to understand, and I used to tell people all the time, I've had friends that have been dope dealers that I'm friends with to this day, in and out of prison, and good people. Let me tell you something, these are some of the most smartest men I've ever met. They need opportunities as well. They made some decisions in their life that may not have went down the same path that I'm in, but I'm not one to judge that man or that woman's life at all. They deserve that opportunity. And if they have done their time and actually have served their time, and the jury of their peers or whatever has acquitted them, or they are allowed to come out, then they should be able to have the same things that I have today. So if that means that they're able to get a professional license, so be it. So I do believe in that. I also want to make sure that those individuals are able to actually start small businesses. That is extremely important. Small business is the backbone of our state. Whether on the eastern side or on the rural side of our state, small businesses is what makes this state grow. So those individuals need to have an opportunity that once they do come out of prison, that they are able to actually start their businesses as well. Use the knowledge that they have learned, whether it's in prison, before prison, or whatever the case may be, and give them that opportunity. Because you know why? There's a lot of private and public individuals that will not hire those individuals. So you have to give them an alternative. You have to give them another option. And if they're ready to start a new business, then so be it. I believe that should happen. And as a Secretary of State, as you know, I am the small business and the chief business officer for the state of Nebraska. So all you that have small businesses, you will see my name at the bottom of your documentation, because we do all the administration for all small businesses, whether it's an LLC, S Corp, or whatever the case may be. So that I want to make sure that we extend that offer to all citizens, all eligible citizens. As far as just what else the Secretary of State does that actually benefits Black and Brown and those individuals and low and moderate income communities as well, because I think people need to understand that, because there is a difference. I've been hearing people, some of our elected officials, who I'll let that remain nameless, is that they continue to say low and moderate income is only Black and brown people. And we need to understand there is a separate, where Black and brown people are throughout this entire state, whether you are in a rural community or in an urban community, we are all over the state. In addition to that, there are poor people all across this state, and they're not just in East Nebraska. I've been going all over this state, and I'm telling you, the folks out in rural Nebraska, and I know some people in East Nebraska don't like to hear this, but there are educational problems in rural Nebraska, big time. Big time. And people have to understand that, because they are living off of property tax money. And the money that is coming in from the government, that is actually coming in, and it's percentages that is going to certain districts in this state. Now we've got some issues in Omaha public schools. We've got some money there, but there are some issues all across the state. We have a lot more in common than people like to try to separate us. It doesn't matter the color of your skin. Education is deserved for every single person, so we need to make sure of that. And the things that the secretaries they have to do with civic engagement and understanding that education is extremely important for everyone in this state. And we have to be able to grab that. We have to understand that it doesn't matter where you come from, that if you are going to have your vote suppressed no matter what, they're going to do that if you're in East Omaha, whether you are in a Black or brown community, or if you are in a poor white community in rural Nebraska. They are pushing for 1%. The 1% of us that have money or are part of the majority. If you are part of that demographic, then you'll have everything that you'll need in the state of Nebraska for you. But if you are not, then you need to make sure that the Secretary of State actually is somebody that is going to uphold you and be your voice. Because I've been running for the 99% for the last 8 months. And I'm telling you, it is serious. There are people out there attempting to put obstacles and barriers because they're trying to cheat their way to victory. And we have to understand how important that vote is. I know Mina and Precious and all these folks that are knocking on doors. How many times are we telling people that your vote matters, and they say, "Oh, I'm not going to vote. I'm not registered. I don't care." You see what happened 2 years ago. What happened 2 years ago is because you didn't vote. Don't get it twisted. Don't try to blame the Russians. Don't try to blame all the interference. It is because Democrats thought his election was a joke and decided not to vote. And Republicans thought it was a joke and decided not to vote. You have to make sure to exercise your right and make sure that people understand that. The Secretary of State's responsibility is to make sure we're working for everyone. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, or an independent. We need to make sure everyone has a voice. And one thing that I'm going to do as Secretary of State is I'm going to make sure that every single party is represented. I've been an independent for a long time, became a Democrat. Partially because I had to decide from a party standpoint, which to me, it kills me because independents are so huge in this state. And they're being disenfranchised by Republicans and Democrats. So when I become Secretary of State, we're going to make sure our independents have a voice.
I'll give you a minute and a half to do spiel and some closing remarks to the group.
You know, it is important. I'm going to spend this time talking about the importance of protecting the vote. We see what's happening in Georgia. We see that the 50,000 people and 88% of those individuals are black that are not allowed to register to vote. We are also seeing that the Secretary of State in that state is actually running for governor and still managing his own race, which makes no sense to me. That is a conflict of interest if I ever seen one. We're seeing what they're doing in North Dakota. We're seeing what they're doing in Ohio, where they voted 5-4 that the Secretary of State, me, can actually purge eligible voters from the voting rolls just because you haven't voted in the last 2 elections. That's what they're doing. The Secretary of State is the key. Every election starts and ends with the Secretary of State. You have to understand the importance of that position. And in my eyes, I love Bob Chris. I think Bob Chris and Lynn Walls are going to win. But the Secretary of State is the most important position in this election in 2018. It truly is. We definitely need to change that governor. But the Secretary, and I'm not just saying this because of me, because we have to understand what also happened in 2016 is that people thought not only that was a joke, that they didn't think about what would happen if he would win. I need you to think about if Spencer does not win. Because my opponent is the same, has the same politics as the individual that's running against Stacey Abrams in Georgia, Kim. He is far right of Trump. He will make sure that whatever we do to suppress votes, that is where his world is going to be at. This is important. We have to understand, 2018, yes, it is the most important election of my generation, of many of us. But 2018 is the appetizer. 2020 is the main course. You have to understand that. You have to understand the folks you elect in 18, most of us will be in office in 2020. When the census comes out, when the presidential election is. That is important. Exercise your right to vote. If you know people in your family that is not registered, make sure that, well, now, but make sure those people get out and vote. Make sure they vote. Take 10 people, make sure they vote. If they need rides, get them to the polls. We need to make sure that everyone exercises their right to vote. I'm tired of them saying North Omaha don't vote. I'm tired of them saying South Omaha don't vote. You now have candidates that you are energized and excited to vote for. Vote for them. We have 2 great women. We got Mike Hughes. We've got Eric. We got Tom. We got some of the best candidates that we've had in a long time. Make sure you exercise your right to vote. Make sure you vote Spencer Danner, Secretary of State. Thank you all for that.
All right. Next,
I'm sorry, Wade Hudson.
Mr. Hudson is sitting in for the sheriff who couldn't make it tonight. So we have Mike Hughes and the representative. This is for the offices for the Douglas County Sheriff's Department. I'm gonna moderate, and I think I have a coin And here, who wants to call it for who's going to answer the question?
That's not necessary.
No?
This is a candidate form.
Okay.
He's not a candidate, so I would ask that he not participate at this event this evening.
Wow. Mr. Hudson, how do you want to handle that? Like, I mean, I'm in a strange position here.
Well, the sheriff did respond, and we were told that a representative would be allowed to sit in his place. So this forum is important, so I feel that I should be allowed to speak. I know Mr. Hughes don't want me to speak, but I think if this audience want to hear what goes on within our agency, I'm here to talk about it. I'm here to speak on it.
Would you submit to a democratic process where we see a raise of hands for people who are okay with that? Because this is an informational session for them. So can we do that?
You're absolutely correct. I would ask that he give his stump speech for the candidate and allow me to answer questions from the public. As once again, this is a candidate forum, and I do not want to take away from the people in the audience.
Can I see go ahead, sir.
And I would agree that it is a candidate forum, but again, we cannot proxy. We cannot send Sarah.
Question.
Wait, real quick. We're not going to this out of control.
For him, if he wants to, can you guarantee everything that comes out of your mind or your mouth will be followed through exactly by the person you represent?
I can guarantee that I will answer these questions.
No, can you guarantee everything that comes out of your mind will be exactly what the candidate thinks and will do?
I cannot guarantee that everything will be exactly what it does. No, that means
All right, so let's wait. Oh, yes, sir.
Why isn't the candidate here tonight?
I don't know.
He chooses not to be at any of these community events.
Okay, let's take a vote in the audience. If it's how many people would prefer that the representative read his opening remarks and then leave it to the candidate? We'll do it with a show of hands. Okay, so it looks like, sir, you're fine either way, but the majority of people prefer that, and then perhaps after Mr. Hughes asks the questions, and after you've read, you can take questions from people individually. Is that acceptable, sir?
Sure, if that's what you wish, that's fine.
I appreciate that. All right, so why don't you, we'll let you, if you have something prepared.
Okay. First of all, I want to thank the sponsoring groups for allowing me to speak today. My name is Wayne Hudson. I'm here on behalf of Sheriff Tim Dunning, who is out of the city today. I felt that this forum is important, so I asked the sheriff if I could represent him. This race, in my humble opinion, comes down to who has the most law enforcement, management, and leadership experience to lead the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, and who has a proven track record of sustained civic engagement and community service. Sheriff Dunning has over 45 years of law enforcement experience, with 25 of those being as your Douglas County Sheriff. He has led the Douglas County Sheriff to being an accredited agency through the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, CALEA. During the last CALEA inspection, the agency received the highest accreditation distinction, which is excellence. Only approximately 3% of all accredited law enforcement agencies in the nation have this honor. He manages a $16.7 million budget consisting of 210 personnel and 3 separate contracts. For 25 continuous years, the DCSO has been under budget. That saves taxpayers money. We have a state-of-art crime lab, which also has a dual accreditation. Sheriff Dunning is also a CLEA commissioner, where he sets national standards for law enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, and I appreciate you for following the democratic process. So I'm going to direct the questions to Mr. Hughes at this time.
I ask that he get off the stage, please.
I don't know what to do about that. I really don't.
I would ask Mr. Hughes, what's the problem?
Okay, but you agree that you're not going to answer the questions, right? Okay, so I mean, fine.
I want to address this because this is important.
We want to hear what you have to say.
As a candidate for a sheriff, you have to be visible. As a candidate in any race, you have to be visible in the community. You have to be able to answer the tough questions that come from community members. And as your next sheriff, I will be at forums. I will be visible in our communities. And to send a surrogate or a proxy to sit in and answer the tough questions, I think is absurd. We debated at Big Mama's Kitchen, and the proxy here, the surrogate here, stood up and answered questions for the sheriff. And I think it's a shame. And that's why I'm asking that he remove himself from the stage, because this is a candidate forum, not a proxy, not a surrogate forum.
It is a candidates forum, and as one of the responsible parties, I guess, since it is here at University of Nebraska-Omaha, and I am part of the faculty in the Black Studies Department, I have a question first. Do we know why Mr. Dunning has chosen not to come to this event and other events? And in particular, since we did put it out into the community as a racial justice candidates forum, which is a conversation that is necessary to have with the Sheriff's Department and law enforcement. Do we know why he's not here?
I do know why. As far as the other forums, I do not, but right now I know he is out of town. That's why I was asked, and I asked for it to sit in this place. Now, I know one thing that's gonna come up, because Mr. Hughes wanna make a big conversation about these traffic stops. And as the one who is in charge of our patrol division, what I'm not gonna have him do is have him put it out there that the sheriff department is discriminately racial profiling people, especially as the African American that's in charge of our patrol unit. That's running for sheriff right now too, it look like, right? In 2022, I'll be on the campaign trail. I knew that's what it was about. If that's
Okay, we're gonna get.
I knew that's what it was about.
All right, we're gonna get to the questions. Here we go. We have seen an increase in so-called nuisance 911 calls against African Americans recently, from having a barbecue in a public park to attempting to enter their own homes, being falsely accused of groping white women, and these are troubling trends. What ideas would you incorporate to reduce these calls and de-escalate situations like these in general, so that lives aren't put at risk? Let you start, Mike.
Definitely think it's a cultural issue, a cultural dynamic, that law enforcement, once again, has to be visible in communities, and being able to bridge the gap between the community and our law enforcement, I think is huge. I think law enforcement is the #1 entity that deals with diversity issues, that deals with the general public in a day in, day out basis. So even when we're getting nuisance calls, you have to be culturally aware of what's going on in various communities, so that if you get a call that says, hey, there's a black man walking down the street, you got to be able to understand that people don't have vehicles in Northeast, Southeast Omaha, or if they're out in Western Douglas County, you have to understand why those people are there. And also, once again, if we're talking about barbecues and different things of that nature, that's a cultural dynamic in the African American community. So once again, just being visible and understanding the dynamics of the people around us, I think is huge.
Thank you. And sir, did you want to?
It is absolutely absurd that people are calling on people for barbecues, for being at swimming pools, things of that nature. Absolutely absurd. So, and I've heard these calls come out. And what we have to do is educate the law enforcement, our personnel, to say, if those calls come out, you don't have to stop and bother people. If they're out walking, they're not committing any type of criminal act, leave them alone. Just because you get called to a certain area does not mean you have to take any enforcement action. Doesn't mean you have to stop and talk to them. If the call is for them being in a certain place they shouldn't be, if they're not there, leave them alone.
I just have a point of clarification.
Is he
if we're going to listen to the candidate only?
That's
Okay, yes, no, that's on me. That was on me. That's my bad. So yeah, all right. So you get to sit up here, I guess, but like you'll have to. Okay, great. So the second question for Mike is Mike Brown, Laquan McDonald, Stephon Clark, Tamir Rice, Charlena Lyles, Yvette Smith. Far too many other black men and women have been shot and killed, often unarmed, by law enforcement officers. These incidents have been contributed to an erosion of trust. African Americans are simply afraid for their lives when it comes to contact with law enforcement. How will you reestablish trust while also reducing instances of the use of lethal force against unarmed people?
I think what we're doing today is a prime example, running for Douglas County Sheriff, to be able to change the tangent and the tenor of our conversations in our communities. Essentially, once again, I think it's back to our 3 core values: increased transparency, when events are happening in our community, being able to bring those conversations to the forefront, increase collaboration, working with other law enforcement units, working with community leaders in order to bring the best public safety that's efficient to you as a citizen. And then lastly, which is huge, which is major, that I don't understand why we haven't been doing these things in the past 25 years, is community-oriented policing. Once again, being in the forefront of ideals and bringing new initiatives to the table in order to engage our young people. I think once we lose sight of our young people and let them grow up, they gain these biases and they gain this distrust from what they're learning from their family members and other people in the community, because our law enforcement is out of touch with that community. So once again, just being visible in our communities is key.
Terrell, yes.
I think what we see today is the reason why the Black community doesn't trust the sheriff's department. And Mike, I wanted to ask you, what do you think of the optics that a white man, a candidate for sheriff, sent another Black man to debate you at a racial justice forum?
Whoa.
Say that again. Say that again. So y'all get all your cameras and y'all point them that way. You ask that question again.
What do you think of the optics that a white man, a candidate for sheriff, sent another Black man to debate you at a racial justice forum?
So now, you know, it's been like this since day one. So day one, we announce our candidacy. Mr. Hudson shows up at our campaign kickoff. We have events. Mr. Hudson shows up at our campaign kickoff. We have candidate forums. Mr. Hudson shows up. No sheriff. I think it's pitting us together. As he just alluded to, he's talking about already running for sheriff, right? Why? Why are we having this conversation? Why isn't the sheriff here to take on these hard questions and answer questions in the dynamic of who he is and what he represents in the office? So I definitely think it's pitting us together. I definitely think that the idea of him being here is actually, and I'm gonna be honest with you, it's part of that transparency piece. It's getting to me. It's getting to me because as a Black man, to see another Black man kind of try to tear me down, I think is a real big issue that I'm out of right now. So thank you for the question.
Okay. Another question from the audience.
Hello, my name is Cornelius Williams. I'll be quite honest. I know that police are needed for our protection, but at the same time, I drive down the street and I feel like they're gonna pull me over. When they pull me over, because I get pulled over about once or twice a year, easily. There's always an attitude of arrogance. Why? I can give you thousands of stories, like, well, one particular guy pulls me over and asked me if there was somebody else in the car. I looked over at him and looked over my car and was like, no, there's no one there. Then he's gonna ask me why I'm giving an attitude. So the thing is here, when encountering police officers, they take an attitude of their right and that they have the right to do what they want. Sir, not Mike, you're doing what you want. We told you to go sit down. You can come and ask questions as a participant. Please, honor our request.
Okay. So, I guess I'm going to defer to.
You're doing what you want like regular police officers do all the time. That's the problem.
To answer your question, you know, I've dealt with those type of things growing up. One time in particular, you know, I did a legal U-turn.
And you're smiling about it too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you got a smile on your face.
I did a legal U-turn and I got pulled over and was asked was I lost. You know, different things like that is the reason why we're here today, and once again, why I'm running for a law enforcement office, to be able to change the tenor and the dialogue that we're having in our communities, which I think is huge. And now we can talk about those traffic stop numbers, and I'll let you interject, Mr. Hudson. To your point, the traffic stop numbers come out last April, and you know, we talked about them. And we're getting so much backlash for talking about numbers that represent our law enforcement community here. And I'm shocked and appalled not only the fact that people are asking us why we're talking about them, they're refuting the claims when the organizations are releasing this information. And all we're doing is speaking on the facts that have been released. So for instance, it was said in April that Douglas County's African-American population is 11%, and 14% of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office traffic stops were African-American. So we spoke about that. And now we're getting all this backlash and all these meaningless conversations when all I want to do is have a real conversation as to why these things are happening. And all I do is get backlash from whoever is offended by it, rather than talking and having real dialogue and real solution-based conversation. So once again, if we're pulling people over at a higher rate, we need to be able to articulate that to our community and our community leaders. For instance, if we're going to say, hey, we're pulling people over, we can't identify who they are, or we can't guess their race or different things like that, well, they have an identification card. 9 times out of 10, when you pull them over, you ask for driver license, you ask for insurance, whatever it may be, and it tells you on their driver license who these people are and what they represent. So for me, once again, is sitting down, having honest conversations, being solution-based, and offering remedies as to why and how do we change and articulate to our community why Black and brown people get pulled over at a higher rate here in our county. And I think it's absurd to even have any other dialogue besides that.
Can you make it quick, because I have one more after yours, and then we're gonna let Mike have his closing statement, and then we have to get to our final 2 candidates.
So clearly the state legislature and Douglas County will do many things together. I'm curious, in your purview, what are some ways that you promise to work with the state legislature in terms of addressing racial justice, addressing the issues that you brought up, and if you have any ideas about what's best and how we can do that, please elaborate.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. The Sheriff's Office and other law enforcement agencies work hand in hand with state lawmakers as the state creates the laws and law enforcement enforces the laws, absolutely. One thing I will speak of is juvenile justice. I definitely think we need to take those funds that we're dedicating to the Juvenile Justice Center being built, $120 million. We need to take that and invest in our young people rather than spend money on our young people, so that we can't continue these vicious cycles of brown and Black people being put into our correctional or our penal system. I definitely think we can invest that money into a rehabilitative process, or more of this integrating people into society. I work with young people during the daytime. That's my daytime job, and a lot of them don't have guidance. A lot of them don't have the mental fortitude to focus and do things on their own. So they need assistance, they need help. And when they commit crimes out here, the last thing we're focusing on is mental health. We need to focus on young people's mental health and building them up to be the best productive citizens that they can be. So to answer your question, I plan on working hand in hand with state lawmakers to provide the best services for the citizens of Douglas County.
I'm gonna let Shamika do this real quick question.
Real quick.
All right.
Hi, Mike. Thanks for being here. I would just like to know, what is the checks and balance systems for offices like the Douglas County Sheriff? I was a victim of Sarpy County, and I ended up getting my case thrown out of court because my constitutional rights were violated on my graduation night. But as a result of that, I've had to deal with, things that have followed that I've had to, money I was lost, other things that affected my life in a negative way. And there seems like there's no recourse because no lawyers will take my case, none of that. To stop that from happening in Douglas County, what are the checks and balances system? If there's a problem with the sheriff, if there's a problem with the county, who do we go to rectify any ills that are done to us?
Great question, and I'm sorry you had to endure that. Right now, you just go file a complaint with the sheriff's office. Right now, you just go file a complaint with the police department. There's no oversight as far as public oversight. I definitely think that there needs to be a public oversight. There needs to be a way for the law enforcement official to be able to answer to the community. And if I'm elected as your next sheriff, that's what I will push for. I will push for an auditor. I will push for a public board that will be able to review cases
cases and make sure that law enforcement is held to the highest standard possible. And I will be at events as this to make sure that if there's any gripes or grievances that we can address those on the spot. I will be accessible, I will be accountable, and I will be transparent as possible as your next sheriff. So once again, I feel for you, and I hate that you had to go through that NP.
All right, so this is the last question, Mike, and I'm gonna give you like a minute and a half for a closing statement. So the last question, and I'm sure you have more, but what are 3 to 5 aspects of the current Douglas County Sheriff Department that you believe need to improve, and what would you do to improve them?
Absolutely, and I think 3 of those 5 are one of the reasons why we're running. One once again, is increased collaboration. Our current sheriff had issues with city leaders and past administrations as far as collaborating to bring the most effective and efficient public safety to you all here in Douglas County. We're looking at a demerging process that we had with the crime lab that Mr. Hudson mentioned. So now we have a crime lab that isn't being effective and efficient because the city of Omaha and the Douglas County Sheriff's Office decided to demerge those services, and now the crime lab is being processed by the University of Nebraska Medical Center here for the city of Omaha. Next, we'll talk about that community-oriented policing aspect, which I think is huge. Once again, that seat was empty tonight. We said the surrogate, and not to just harp on that, but those are the reasons why we need change. Those are the reasons why somebody can sit in office for 23 years unopposed, and once we oppose them, now they're not visible at all. Because guess what? They weren't visible beforehand. So I definitely plan on being active in our communities. We'll be engaged with young people. We'll be engaged in our school systems. We'll be engaged in our juvenile justice center, system. And I just, overall, we'll make a great impact here in Douglas County.
Thank you so much.
Oh, yes. I just want to say this before both of you depart, and I want to say for the record that I don't ever want to be a part of anything where one black man is throwing the other black man under the bus. I don't want to be a part of that, and it kind of felt that way tonight. Mike, I don't know you personally, but I've met you over the course of this campaign, and I think you are a wonderful young man. I know Wayne personally, and I've known him for many years, and I felt like this turned into something else that I didn't want to be a part of. But I do want to say, when we didn't throw you under the bus, Sheriff Dunning did. He should have been here, and he should have been at a number of these forums because people want to talk to him. I appreciate you being here, but something about what happened in the room rubbed me the wrong way. I don't ever want to see a public display of that because I have sons and I'm a black woman. And we know all of that is part of why we're here, some of that systemic things that exist that followed us from the plantation where you will send someone else, and this is not an indictment on you, Wayne, at all. It's an indictment on him and why he did this to 2 black men. And I think that's a conversation for the record that we need to have.
Thank y'all. Did you want to like a minute and a half to close off, or you?
Absolutely, and I thank everyone for being here tonight, and I'm glad that we had this discussion. Once again, I'm Mike Hughes, candidate for Douglas County Sheriff. As your next sheriff, we'll focus on increased transparency, increased collaboration, and a major focus on community-oriented policing. As a young person, I was part of great public safety. I was a member of the United States Army. I was a law enforcement official in Georgia. And as a young person, I just dealt with a lot of things, and law enforcement was there to kind of guide me and lead me in the right direction. So that's the mission of running for sheriff today. So once again, I encourage you to go do some research about your candidates. We have a website at hughesforsheriff.com. That's hughesforsheriff.com. We're also visible on Facebook at Mike Hughes for Sheriff, and Twitter at Sheriff_Hughes. And once again, please do your research on candidates, please, because things like this are vital to our success. And once again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Mr. Barrett and Mr. Williams, who will be our final 2 candidates for the evening. And I hope people do stick around for this because this is a very important issue to talk about from a racial justice lens. So I don't know if y'all have any preference for. Yeah, we're gonna do the coin toss on who will just quickly introduce themselves first.
You're balling. All right, heads. All right, tails. You go first. Okay.
Okay, so yeah, just like a little 2-minute intro. Thank you, Eric.
Hi, everybody. My name is Eric Williams. I'm candidate for the OPPD Board of Directors in Northeast Omaha. That's Subdivision 6. That includes the east part of Dundee, east part of Benson, Raven Oaks, Ponca, Florence, historic North Omaha, and North Downtown. I decided to run for the Board of Directors because public power has been a tremendous asset to the people of Nebraska for about 100 years, and I want to ensure that Omaha Public Power District continue to deliver high-quality results and improve the lives of all people in our community into the future. There are 3 things that I'm focused on. First, fair and affordable electric bills for everyone. Second, improved public engagement with all members of our community. And third, investing in clean energy and new energy market opportunities to help reduce costs and help people save energy and save money on their bills. I've been talking to people at community events, at their doors, on the phones, and then engaging through a variety of online platforms for the last year. And so I've been continually engaged, and if elected, I look forward to keep engaging with all members of our community to make sure that our public power district deliver the best results for everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Eric. Mr. Barrett.
I want to thank the Racial Justice Candidate Forum for inviting us here. I think it's a great deal. I can't change the idea that I'm white. And I went to Great Prep and I went to UNL, and it's a privilege. And the thing is, I can't change it, but I can see how a black person lives their life. I know, I can read the statistics and I can see the issues. It's a tougher road to hoe if you're a person of color. Eric lives about 2 blocks from me. Mina lives about 2 blocks from me, and I like to consider it a diverse neighborhood. But it's not North Omaha. It's East Dundee. It's Dundee. It's a lot safer. But the reason I got on this board was 3 things. I have 3 daughters, and I felt OPPD was a great asset, but it was screwing things up, and it couldn't figure out what direction it was going. I wanted to see cleaner air. I wanted to see fairer rates, and I wanted to see more transparency. I got on this for a social justice issue, and it's a state monopoly is why we have public power. It's because investor-owned utilities wouldn't come to Nebraska and string wire for farmers and ranchers and poor folks because they didn't see any money in it. So we took over the public system, and this is where we are now, and I think it's a great system. So here's the 3 things that I focus on is with this group is since 2014 we have cut late fees for non-payment in half, which is huge because it can be a giant pain in the ass. And I think the penalties are punitive, and I'm trying to change that with shutoffs. I have a dad on oxygen, and I know how it is if the power goes out. Did anyone lose power in this last storm? I'm sorry, and I hope it came on quick, but OPPD prides itself in being reliable. We have a troubleshooter team that goes out there and really takes control, and they do a great job. So, you know, if you have oxygen, or if you need phones charged, or if your refrigerator, your food is rotting, or you have to keep something cold or warm, it sucks. So I focus on reliability. Streetlights go out a lot in North Omaha, and bad things happen, and people get scared when they don't have any streetlights. So we're changing those in the next 2 years to all LEDs. OPPD.com is a fantastic app where you can go in and you can see where you can push in your address, what the problem is, and somebody will hopefully come out and fix it. The other thing is a healthier North Omaha is we've removed 60% of the coal from the North Omaha plant on Pershing Drive, and if reelected, I want that to be 100%. It's a slow change. It's $1 billion industry, and things move slow, and you don't want to waste taxpayer or ratepayers' money. So please vote for me, Tom Barrett. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So wait, you spoke first, so maybe Tom, you'll answer this question first, and we'll reverse the order. So the first question is that OPPD recently increased the fixed fee amount for monthly power bills. Can you please discuss if you believe this disproportionately impacts low wealth, low income people of color, and your plans to better assist them deal with this increase?
I think it did. I was the only board member besides Kim Gay, who lives in Sarpy County, to vote against it, and I spoke against it. I thought it was a screwed up deal that I didn't understand. It was people who were low energy users, people on fixed incomes, were charged the same fee as a person who had hot tub and a pool in West Omaha, and I thought that was bogus. So I voted against it, and if re-elected, I'd like to revisit that and hopefully change it. The only good outcome, the only outcome is, I think for OPPD, it's a revenue neutral. It's not a money maker for OPPD. It just levels out. The revenue stream is flatter as opposed to having a high rate in the summer and less money coming in. So it kind of levels it out, and it allots 70% of what OPPD spends its money on is a fixed fee. The other half is variable. Those are energy costs usually. So what it did was it allotted that fee to it. I'm not condoning it. I'm not supporting it. I'm just explaining what it does. So I would revisit that.
Thank you. Eric?
Yep, in 2015, management proposed the increased fixed fee, and I, along with about 100 members of the community, wrote letters in opposition to that fixed fee. There were about a dozen organizations who were specifically opposed for a few reasons. It hurts people who are low and moderate income, fixed income, people who are conservative in their energy use, or people who generate a little bit of their own energy and reduce the amount that they get from OPPD. At the time, the reasoning was portrayed as leveling out the revenue, and OPPD is a $1.1 billion per year organization. And if you can't figure out how to budget throughout the course of the year, I have questions about the rest of the $1 billion and what you're doing with it. Secondly, we were told that it was to help level out the revenue, but currently on Mick Mines' current director's website and in recent interviews, he explicitly said that it was because too many people were generating energy from solar and they did not want to allow as much renewable energy to be generated outside of OPPD's control. That was explicitly told to us that that was not the reason in 2015. So either Mick Mines is drastically uninformed or the management lied to the public about the reason for that fixed fee increase. Regardless, the outcomes are clear. A high fixed fee is a regressive rate structure. It means that people who use less than average pay higher average rates. People who use more energy than average pay lower rates. And that is strongly correlated with socioeconomic and racial bias in our community, and I think we all know that. So the last debate featured some discussion about facts related to the proportion of people who were, the racial breakdown of the proportion for traffic stops. The trouble with the fixed fee is we don't have any information about who is negatively impacted by a higher fixed fee. So the very first step should be to evaluate who in our community is hurt by the fixed fee and find out if there is any racial or geographic or income-based bias. I think we'll find out that there is, and to date there hasn't been any information, and that should be the very first step. So yes, I would work to reduce the fixed fee and have a more fair and affordable rate structure for everybody.
Thank you, both of you. Eric, you'll answer this next question first. It's a little heavy, but would you consider ending OPPD's policy of shutting off services for those who find themselves in financial hardship, especially those who can prove increased medical costs, for instance, due to the location of the existing OPPD coal-fired power plant in North Omaha, which is known to have resulted in disproportionate rates of asthma and other cardiovascular diseases? Please explain why you do or do not support this idea.
Shutoffs, we have a punitive policy on shutoffs where if the power is shut off, one, there can be very negative consequences for families and children, and two, to get the power turned back on, it's a $75 fee. And so that's designed to be a deterrent, but if your power is shut off, that is enough of a deterrent. You do not need an additional reminder that you are behind in your bills by getting slapped with an additional fee. So I think we need to take a look at that. Secondly, does anybody know what the shutoff policy is? I think the answer is no, because there is no written shutoff policy anywhere on OPPD's website or anything that has been displayed to the public. And so people are uncertain of what are the guidelines for shutoffs. They are working to improve this, and yes, over the last 5 years, the shutoffs have decreased. The most accurate data available to the public is the total number of shutoffs across all of the OPPD's service territory on a monthly basis. That is not sufficient information to determine whether or not people who have medical conditions or people in one part of town have been negatively impacted by this policy. So first, let's look at the fee and work to stop punishing people because they can't afford their bills. And secondly, we should have a clear and transparent policy so that people know what the conditions are that would cause a shutoff and how they can avoid them. Third, I would like to make sure and focus on assistance to people who get in a shutoff situation. Rather than punishing them, let's go in and find out why did they get behind on their energy bill, what are the high energy uses in their home, let's help make energy upgrades to reduce their bill in the future so they don't fall behind again and get in another shutoff situation. So I think there's a lot of ways that we can help people, because again, this is a public utility designed to improve the quality of life for people in our community, and we don't need to be punishing, we need to be helping people have access to electricity.
Thank you, Tom. And just let me know if you need me to ask the question again. Yeah, of course. So the question was, would you consider ending OPPD's policy of shutting off services for those who find themselves in financial hardship, especially those who can prove increased medical costs due to the location of the existing OPPD coal-fired power plant, which you referenced earlier in North Omaha, which is known to have resulted in disproportionate rates of asthma and other cardiovascular diseases?
With the shutoffs, I feel that a $75 turn back on fee is punitive. It's if they can't afford their bill to pay it that month, it's kind of a slap in the face to kick them with a $75 fee. Again, we've adopted a much gentler, and it's called the Minnesota plan. If it's going to be too cold, if it's going to be 32 degrees, or for 32 or lower for the next 3 days in the calendar, we can't shut off, or we've changed that policy. And then if the heat index is going to be 95 and above, we don't shut off. So there was this year in some months there were 28 days where OPPD could not go out and shut off power. It's not a happy thing for us to do, and so it's a kindler, gentler. And I don't think there's a written policy, because we look at each case and the severity of the shutoff. There's different things of shutoff. It's not a clear, I'm living at home, I shut off. There's people who are, I'm not paying my bill because I live at my girlfriend's house, or that's not my bill, that's my grandmother's house. There's so many different variables that go into a shutoff that a written policy would have to be about 4 or 5 pages long to jump through the hoops of how a community actually lives in a house and uses energy and pays or doesn't pay their bill. Not everything is that cut and dried. So those are instances where we try to work with each homeowner, each residence to find a solution. And it's not perfect, but we're doing the best we can. And if you have any input on how to do it, I'm all ears.
So, Tom. Oh yeah, I just had a real quick follow-up, Mika, and it's just to Tom because he's currently on the board. Because you mentioned this Minnesota plan. If your power is already shut off, how does that work? If say it's like the day before it drops 32 degrees below, do you turn it back on and then shut it off again, or what happens?
I hope not. That'd be a waste of effort and time. If it's shut off and the temperature drops, that I'd have to talk to somebody in our customer service to see. But for instance, in January, it was so cold that there were no shutoffs during that month. February was a cold month. 2018, there was only 1 day that shutoffs. So there's only so many people who can do shutoffs. So if you were being a real jerk about the whole thing, you do it throughout the month. But we're not doing that because it's a public corporation, and we're trying to be a better asset to the community.
Awesome, thank you. And did you want to respond to anything, Eric, at all?
Yeah, so I appreciate that the number of shutoffs have decreased, and specifically the 32 and 95 policy. I'd like to see more clarity on that so people can have some understanding of what that is. If that means 5 pages, I think those are 5 pages well spent.
Thank you. Next question is about a very, very important issue. I personally think it's the greatest issue that's facing us right now. The United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, their recent report stipulates that we have about 12 years to address the climate crisis before it becomes even more untenable. First, do you agree with preeminent environmental justice scholars Dr. Beverly Wright and Dr. Robert Bullard that climate change impacts Black and brown people first and worst? And what programs would you bring or will you bring to OPPD to address climate change in a way that directly benefits the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change? Who will answer this? I'm losing my mind. Who went first last time? Did you go first last time? Yep. So he goes first? Tom?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, Tom.
So in the last couple of weeks, there was a United Nations climate change that's saying climate change, global warming is more frightening than what we thought it was. So it was an alert to the global community to move faster and stop dragging your feet. However, under this administration, we left the Paris Treaty, which the best way to get anything done is to do it on a global thing. It's just not national. I mean, when there's pollution in China, and there's a lot of it, in 5 days, we see it in the western United States. There's plants that burn coal in Texas, and we see it in North Dakota within days. So this whole thing has to be treated on a global scale. But it's like with recycling and picking up litter is OPPD can do everything possible, and that's cutting back on coal, adding more renewable energy, and hopefully by 2020 we'll be 50% renewable energy, and we're trying to lower our carbon intensity. And with the issues of Black and brown people, the areas on the coastal areas are going to be hit the most, and there's going to be mass migration and a lot of anxiety in the world if we can't slow global warming and make the changes of how we're living.
So climate change is happening. It is caused by people. The consequences will be severe, and we should take immediate and direct action to both reduce the causes and mitigate the damages that we already know will happen in the future. Very straightforward. Jim Hansen was at Congress in 1987. So for essentially my entire life, we have known that climate change was scientific reality. Somehow we spent a whole bunch of years not understanding that and allowing people to believe that it wasn't real. This is not an issue of belief. This is an issue of scientific fact. And I agree with the 10,000 scientists who have documentation of the causes and impacts of climate change, and not the dozen or so who don't. Yes, the impacts are least caused by people of color and will be most dramatically felt by people of color. And that means in Omaha, in the United States, and around the world. So we have a significant racial inequity in our climate change, both causes and impacts. I think we should definitely address that. As far as Omaha goes, your last question also talked about health impacts from the North Omaha coal plant. Coal causes health impacts to people, it causes environmental impacts to the planet, and both of those are being disproportionately felt by people who live closest to the North Omaha coal plant. That means people in Subdivision 6 in Northeast Omaha, and primarily black Omaha residents. So yes, we have a significant responsibility to recognize the inequality that's come from our energy policy in the past, and responsibility to get that corrected. So we need to find ways to identify the health problems that have been caused and take action to fix them. Specifically on moving away from climate-causing fossil fuels, we should have more solar on rooftops, we should have more community solar projects, we should have more utility-scale solar, we should continue with additional wind energy, and all of those things are getting more cost-effective every day and out-competing existing fossil fuel resources across the country. So we need to understand that despite being only 5% of the world's population in the United States, we have an outsized responsibility for the greenhouse gas emissions that are causing the climate change. So we have been the bad actor for a very long time. Somehow we pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which is a significant lack of national leadership. And so we need local leaders to step up and recognize that we have responsibility and we need to take action on climate change now.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. And
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course, yes.
My mom always taught me to be humble, and what Eric just said is correct, and I agree with it. So, well spoken, Erin.
Well, thank you. That's wow. I was just going to ask you, just a quick yes or no. Last year, Representative Gabbard introduced the All Fossil Fuel Act, which would commit us to 100% renewable by 2035. Would y'all be in support of a bill like that? Just quick yes or no. Eric?
I would say that we should look to 100% clean and renewable energy eventually. 2035 is a relatively short timeline. I'm not sure that's technically possible, and I guess I would have trouble saying that by 2035, that's a relatively short timeline, dramatically in front of even what the IPCC is currently asking for. So looking to 100% clean and renewable energy in the future, yes, that's definitely a guidepost we should aim for. That particular metric I think might be a little challenging, and I have not read that specific paper, but I think we should look to get there eventually.
Tom?
I think that metric would be challenging. Because right now, Erin talks about rooftop solar. That's $20,000, and that requires removing of trees. And the people in this room, the first thing I want in my room is I don't want rain to come through. I can't afford a rooftop solar, and there is for solar energy right now. There's not an industrial level of battery saving, so it's called intermittent energy. So wind and solar are intermittent. It's not always there on cloudy days or when it's not blowing. There is no energy. When you turn on your switch, it's not there. What OPPD has to have, and what every utility has to have, is it's called baseload, and unfortunately, it's provided by coal or natural gas or some other energy source that's always there, nuclear or hydro. Is you always have to have a backup where you can always turn it on. That's the most important thing about electricity, and that's what most people want. I'm all for renewable, but we just got to get honest on the playing field. There is no battery backup currently that is industrial or commercially viable. People talk about Arizona, California. Well, they have a different sun pattern than we do. We have great wind, and we're working to take it on. But I'm not going to waste your money to go and buy a ton of wind energy when you don't need it. You only buy, in this business, you only buy and you only build what you think you can use. And so that's how I save ratepayer dollars.
Follow up, Eric, sure.
I'd like to respond to a couple things there specifically because I do have solar on my own roof. It does not cost $20,000. It's about $3 per watt. I have 3,000 watts. $9,000 average plus 30% federal tax credit, so more like $6,000. Secondly, we do have significant amounts of baseload from OPPD, around 3,500 megawatts of baseload generating capacity, and currently we have roughly 1/2 of 1 megawatt of solar and distributed energy in all of OPPD's territory. Germany uses something like 20% wind and solar, and so we could see multiple orders of magnitude increase in our distributed energy before we have any kind of a technical issue. 3, battery technology is exactly that. Technology, it is increasing dramatically. It's getting cheaper and better every year to the point where California recently canceled a natural gas plant in favor of solar plus batteries because it was more cost effective. And the reason that California did that is not because of different solar or weather patterns, but because of different political leadership. They have leaders who understand the consequences of continued addiction to fossil fuels, and they are willing to take action now. I think OPPD needs to demonstrate the same.
Well, once again, thank you guys for both running awesome campaigns and appreciate everything you're doing. So I have a quick question, and I have asked this question, I think, when I first met Eric, and I've asked this question numerous times to OPP board members. The new structure of the payment system. As a North Omaha Neighborhood Alliance leader, we have ran into a problem where now our senior citizens and people with lower incomes now only have 7 days to extend their bill once they have a disconnect notice, and that has been a hindrance to them. I've also heard that yes, you can get a lower amount of that disconnect notices, but why did that change? And then when it changed to a point to where it wasn't a big notification to the citizens. So now they're running into a problem where if they used to be able to say, okay, if my bill's on this, if I have a disconnect notice, I can pay it on this certain date. Now they're saying you only have 7 days from that date. And that kind of, it does affect our senior citizens and people with lower incomes because their checks may not come until the first of the month and they're already most likely 1 month behind. How can we change that so that it's helping them more? Because some of these people may not qualify for NG assistance. They may not be able to call United Way for help because once, if I'm not mistaken, somebody correct me, you can only receive assistance from United Way once in a lifetime. So we're putting the people now to where people are starting GoFundMes and asking nonprofits who do not work in this area to help them pay their electricity. How can we go to a more effective way to extend it without having to, basically going further than 7 days so that people are able to not, be able to pay their bill and not have a disconnect in their home.
Eric? Sure. I do remember when you asked me that when we met at the cleanup about a year ago at the start of the campaign. Since then, 3 other people have specifically cited the 7-day payment window as an issue. If you get paid on the 1st and the 15th, or you're on some type of fixed income, 7 days is not long enough, and you can end up in a weird position where you would like to pay your bill, you would like to avoid the shutoff, but you can't because the income is out of your control. So yes, extending that window seems like a very logical step. I don't see how that's a significant detriment to OPPD. It's just a way to help people be more flexible in their payments. I don't know specifically about the notification that was given at the time when that policy changed, but again, I think that increased public engagement and notification would be a benefit to all members of our community, this policy and other policies. And so, yes, I think that the 7-day notice, or the 7-day timeline is an issue that should be addressed.
Precious, thank you for your question. Yeah, I think 7 days, if you're given 7 business days or 7 calendar days, there could be a problem with when your finances are gonna come in. And I'll look into that. I'll talk to Julie Comstock, who's the head of customer service, and I'll get back with you. And you know, if that was a policy that was made and that number was just picked out without any influence or input from the community, then that should be changed. So thank you.
So you weren't aware
Of the 7 days?
You weren't aware?
No.
I have a quick question. Does OPPD currently use drone technology, and if so, at what capacity?
We do. We have thousands and thousands of miles of power lines, and so it's easier and cheaper. It's safer to inspect them from the air. At times, we've used helicopters that follow along and inspect it with a super camera, where you can look down and see if there's any deficiencies in the line. We're starting a program. I don't know, it may have started, but where drones do the work of helicopters. They videotape it, and there's people that review it, engineers, electrical engineers, and specialists who do that. It's safer, cheaper, and quicker.
I'm gonna give y'all both, yeah, that's you. No, give y'all both a minute to give some questions. I'm sorry, Cornelius, I didn't see you.
I know, I was sitting down waiting for her question. You're really quick about sticking and stuff. And you can see I'm more mild when I'm less emotional. So I'd like to thank both you guys for participating. And I wish that we could actually have you guys in 2 separate districts. Because
I'd like that too.
Because then we can elect you both. But going back to, because okay. So I realize that not all boards do everything that people think they do. So with that, you can answer this based off of what you can answer. We've been talking about solar power, renewable power, and all this other stuff. And I'm one that would have liked to put stuff on my house or stuff I have. But I found that it was the pricing that and the laws and the regulations and everything that were needed to do that made it cost more, push the cost up than just the panels and the batteries and everything themselves. But also with that in mind, is there a possibility, because in North Omaha, unfortunately, we have a bunch of empty lots, that you guys can seek out the owners of the current lot without going through the city and having them take the lots and everything, and get panels that might produce enough energy for a certain area or a block of area.
Great question.
That's a great idea. The thing about public power is, I think in the realm of solar is the cost effectiveness is if they do it on a bigger scale, they're opening up a community solar farm that is 5 megawatts in Fort Calhoun. So it's cheaper to build, it's like going to Costco. It's easier to buy 10 pounds of hamburger than it is to get 1 pound of hamburger. So that's kind of the angle they've taken. I don't know about, community solar. I know Lincoln Electrical Services is big on that. It's just an issue about, one of the basic issues is going up to a landowner and saying, hey, do you want me to put a metal post and do something that I need to set there for 20 years, to get the money back. So I don't know, if I was a landowner, that's the only thing. But the future of the generation of electricity is moving smarter and smarter and smarter. And there might not be any wires overhead in 30 years, and I would hope that we'd be all they said that shingles that had a solar component in it were going to be here. I'm sure they're in somewhere in a lab. They're not here, so I'm open to everything. But OPPD's angle or whatever is to build a big farm and go from there and see how it works. Is it cost effective? Is it a money waste? Does the community like it? And then expand on that or leave it as is.
So some people would like to invest in solar because they value clean energy personally, and that's allowable under what's called the net metering policy, which was passed by the legislature in 2009. And that's what allows me to send my excess electricity from my home back to the grid. Just slightly larger than an individual lot project would be something like a community solar project or a community solar garden. A couple years ago, the legislature had a bill to allow and encourage community scale solar installations. And I would ask that OPPD not provide financial incentives specifically for people to do that, but just make it allowable and acceptable for people who would like to participate in a solar project like that to connect to the grid. If people want to invest in solar because it's important to them, that should be allowable at OPPD. And in fact, the solar project in Fort Calhoun is a great utility scale style project, and people will be able to participate next year, and it will come at somewhat of a slight premium over the rest of the grid electricity. So they are currently asking people to voluntarily contribute additional funds to have solar energy instead of the other energy from the grid. I would support OPPD doing that at other scales as well, not just 5 megawatts at a big farm in Fort Calhoun, but also at the end of your block at, say, 20 kilowatts, or even small installations, on a roof that might be shared by a couple neighbors because they want to have some clean energy and local power in their community.
Great, thank you. Shamika, and then the sister in the back, and then we gotta wrap it up because we're gonna get kicked out.
My name is Mika, and I would like to say that you both are obviously very knowledgeable about your jobs, and but what I've noticed during this forum, listening to the debate here, is if Mr. Barrett, you're an indication of the cultural competency of the OPPD board, then we need to have a bigger forum where you're actually reaching out to North Omaha. I think that even though I know that there are some public meetings that are held, I feel that they're not accessible to the North Omaha community. And I feel that we are not actually in touch with our public power district the way we should, so that the needs of the North Omaha community can be addressed. What are some things that you can do if you're reelected to make sure that North Omaha is included in your decision making when it comes to electricity bills or rates, and the things that North Omaha needs? And Eric, if you can answer that question as well.
Okay, Mika, thank you for your question. The first porthole is to get a response is, there's an app, and some people have smartphones. and some people don't. It's called OPP.com. You can go there, and it's incredible. You can also do it on a computer, but you can type in street outages, what's going on, this, and this. There's a lot of information out there that a lot of people don't know, and I don't know if it's been publicized as well as it could be in their bills. The next thing is, in the last, we have a person there, Lisa Olson, who is really incredible about setting up stakeholder meetings, and she's very aggressive about customer service, about reaching out to people. And when there's a big issue, it used to be OPPD didn't listen, but now they do listen, and they need to listen better. So there's stakeholder meetings, there's focus groups, and there's a lot more thought in how the operation is run.
So until pretty recently, communication with the board was run through OPPD's website and filtered by a secretary. And so there was no mechanism by which you could directly communicate with your board member. I applaud OPPD for moving to direct communication with board members. I think that's a great step in the right direction. You can do that on the website. You can check which board member you'd like to communicate with. That information is passed directly to them. As a candidate, my website, email, phone number, and Facebook page are all publicly available, and if elected, they will continue to be publicly available so people can get in touch with me directly, because I think it's critical that people who elect their representatives at a public agency can access them directly. And so that's why I've spent a huge amount of time over the course of the last year at coffee shops, at meetings, hosting and attending events, just making sure that people know that they can get in touch with me. I've been continually engaged for the last 12 months, and like I said, I would look forward to being continually engaged into the future if I am elected.
You're good? Well, I was gonna say, like with the app, you know, it works in its ways and tweaks its way, because I know that when we had the issue with the lights being off from like 45th and Lake all the way down to 16th and Lake, then we had an issue where lights were all the way down on Ames from like North High School all the way to Walmart. Lights were like completely out during the nighttime. When we would put the code in, they would say they didn't see it, or they'll say that they didn't have a report of it. So we went weeks with those lights being off, and then finally they were like, oh well, it's not going to this department, it's going to this because you're not putting the right, I guess, report code. I'm like, well, lights out. I mean, street lights are out. So I do think that public part needs to make a play. Public needs to have more say in how that runs, because I mean, it has to be user friendly for people who are, I mean, especially our senior citizens. I mean, we have to go back to our seniors, and then people who don't have smartphones or who don't really, you know, use all those different apps and stuff. So I do like the fact that you're both saying more community input, so that we can be able to say, hey, this is what works best for us, and so it can be a better working relationship in the communities across Omaha.
You know, that's a tough nut to crack, is that you have a segment of the population who don't have smartphones, they don't have access to a computer,
or internet,
and when they see a street light out, they think everybody knows that street light's out, but OPPD doesn't know that street light is out. So that's where the rub is. Is there someone on the ground who can identify that or help an elderly person? It's where communities and neighbors have to step up and say, you know what, it's not my street, or you know what, it's not my house. I don't give a damn.
I gotta
jump in there.
But this sister asked because she's been waiting for a while, and then we could approach her maybe after because.
I want to say it's 2018. Why can't something alert the public conversation when something goes out?
I agree. Smart grid's going to have a big impact in the future of our electric utility and Internet of Things. Yes, communication from devices like streetlights. There's about 60,000 of them in Omaha. Yes, they should be able to alert OPPD when they are not functioning correctly.
And why doesn't OPPD have community resilience?
Can we? I gotta.
Sorry.
Yeah,
we gotta cut it, y'all.
Yeah.
We ate 35.
Sneaking relations test. Talking about, it's okay. We're all here for the same thing, to try to get some resolution, but I have.
Can you speak up? I don't think they can hear you into the microphone.
There's an elderly person that I work with, and even tonight when I take text her tonight about her streetlights, and they've been out for months, and it's pitch black where she lives. And she's been calling because she doesn't know how to use the internet and so forth like that. But she's been calling pretty much on a weekly and daily basis to try to get some assistance to get her streetlights on. It is pitch black, and it's dangerous in the area that she lives in. And I want a commitment from either one of you or somebody tonight to get somebody on the ground over there and get some streetlights on.
Give me the information right now, and I'll get somebody there tomorrow.
All right, gentlemen, thank you so much. That was a really great discussion. That's going to conclude it. Before you run out, because Dr. Crawford got to recommend a book. I'm going to recommend this book. I'm halfway through already. It's by Charlene Carruthers, who started the Black Youth Project 100. Called Unapologetic. You really should check this book out. Please fill out a survey if you haven't filled one out already. And, you know, since we're talking about sort of like the new blood, I wanted to bring somebody up here who, you know, kind of paved the way for us and whatnot. And he's a good brother. He's done a lot for the community. So, Mr. Preston Love, why don't you take us home? Okay. Some announcements, real quick. Mr. Preston.
We've been sort of loaded over by this memo in front of us, a slogan, equality for the law. We always have to ask, whose law? When the United States was finished being formed in 1790, the slave-owning white supremacists had incorporated 6% of the population. And that's where the law began. So when they say equality before the law, let's always ask, whose law? And change it.
Thank you. All right, so community announcements. Shamika, real quick, please.
Church and State Forum is Monday, October 29th at 4224 North 24th Street. This is a conversation between local area church leaders and candidates. Some are in this room, some have already left. Plus, Lieutenant Governor Jane Clubb will be there. We'd like to see
State Party Chairwoman.
State Party Chairwoman. Sorry, like everybody knows. And we would love to see the community out to support the connections between faith and politics that are there. Thank you.
Mr. Preston.
I won't be before you long. I do want to say, first of all, on a personal basis, on the subject of oversight, we need to be getting really hard-nosed with both the mayor and our city council to deal with the oversight. Quick comment on that. Secondly, if we have had a lot of dirty tricks being played in our community with signs of most of the people in this room, and if any of you see anyone tampering with signs, call one of us and we'll try our best to deal with it. We surely don't want to catch them in person because then we'll need the sheriff. But so please take me serious on that. We've had a complete destruction of all those signs up there that Mr. Cornelius Williams has twice, and some others. So if you catch somebody, make a call. First of all, let me just take my job is just to say thank you for coming and to close it down, but I want to thank all of the sponsors, the Black Studies Department, number one, which I'm a part of, Delta sorority, Delta Sigma Theta, I'm sorry, which she's a part of, and Black Men United, my organization, Black Votes Matter, Noise, and the League of Women Voters. Not only is it good to thank them, but we do appreciate the collaboration between these organizations and the leadership. Surely want to give thanks to Terry Crawford and Anthony for taking the leadership on this. Give them a hand. And then let me just make a couple very quick comments and then we're out of here. Yes, if I make a couple quick comments after everybody else makes it, I get the point like you talking about. I don't ever understand it. But if I could have your attention just as we close. And that is that, first of all, there is great value in what we've just done. First of all, we've had a conversation on racial justice. We usually do not have conversations on racial justice. And surely we don't have it with candidates. This needs to be done for a lot of reasons. First of all, the candidates and the community needs to understand what racial justice is and all of its implications. Unless we have these forums on racial justice and other justice, we're missing the point. That's number one. And it's good, the value that we get to know these candidates, but also that we need to understand and know the offices. Most of us have learned a lot about the Secretary of State office because of Spencer's candidacy. But we don't know about a lot of these offices that we're voting on. So we look at the candidates and we make judgments on whether they say the right thing and all that. And many times we don't even understand the office that they're running for. And so these forums give us a chance to understand the office and then the candidates. Do y'all hear me?
Yes.
And the other thing is the value for the community to actually do some critical thinking about how they make a decision about the candidates and the office. And quite frankly, there is great value to make the candidates sit on the stage, ask serious questions, and be heard in public, to do critical thinking themselves.